At 8:44 a.m. on June 15, 1944, First Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky crouched low in a Higgins boat, bobbing in the surf, just 300 yards off the southern beaches of Saipan. Around him, the water erupted as Japanese artillery shells bracketed the incoming assault waves. But the 40 men crouching behind the lieutenant were not the polished, poster-perfect soldiers the newsreels back home like to showcase. To the traditional military establishment, these men were the misfits of the division. Many of them had been selected not from honor guards, but from the brig or punishment details. Conventional military doctrine has always insisted that the best soldier is the disciplined soldier, the one who follows the manual, salutes the sharpest, and obeys without question. But by 1944, the Pacific War had taught the Marine Corps a bloody lesson. 7 months earlier, at the Battle of Tarawa, the Corps had lost 904 men in just 76 hours. Colonel James Risley of the 6th Marine Regiment realized that standard infantry training, while excellent for producing riflemen, was insufficient for the dirty, chaotic reality of deep reconnaissance. He didn't just need men who could follow orders. He needed men who could think for themselves, ignore the rules, and fight dirty. Tachovsky had recruited this platoon using a brutal, pragmatic philosophy. He looked for the men the Corps usually tried to hide. His recruiting criteria were simple. When 2 Marines got into a brawl, the loser generally went to the infirmary, while the winner went to the brig. Tachovsky went to the brig and took the winner. He reasoned that a man with a disciplinary record for fighting had already proven he could handle himself in close combat. The Marine Corps called these men troublemakers. Tachovsky called them survivors, and they would need every ounce of that survival instinct. The planners had already done the grim arithmetic for the invasion of Saipan. The expected casualty rate for scout snipers in the Pacific Theater was 73%. As the ramp dropped into the chest-deep water, the 40 thieves were stepping into a mission where they would be outnumbered, outgunned, and operating alone behind enemy lines against a garrison of 30,000 Japanese troops. The roster of Lieutenant Tachovsky's platoon read less like a military unit and more like a police blotter. Over the course of 2 months at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii, he assembled 42 Marines. The demographic spread was erratic. The youngest was a 17-year-old kid. The oldest, a 34-year-old hard case. Their backgrounds were colorful, to say the least. Several had arrest records for theft and assault. One had been a professional boxer, and another had earned his living as a bodyguard for a Chicago gangster. When the Corps offered them the binary choice between the stockade or hazardous combat duty, they universally chose the fight. Training at Camp Tarawa was designed to strip away the rigidity of standard boot camp and replace it with the primal mechanics of survival. While regular infantry practiced formation marching and rifle drills, Tachovsky's men learned the grim calculus of silent killing. They were taught how to approach a sentry from behind and break his neck without making a sound, and how to move through dense jungle terrain without disturbing a single leaf. They became proficient with M1903 Springfield rifles fitted with 8-power unorthodox scopes, learning to hit man-sized targets from 600 yards away. Crucially, they also mastered the use of bazookas and the art of calling in naval gunfire, skills that would soon bridge the gap between reconnaissance and destruction. But their education wasn't limited to combat. In 1944, the Marine Corps was often the poorest equipped branch, fighting with World War I surplus. While the Army received the new gear, survival demanded improvisation, and Tachovsky's men excelled at it. They raided Army supply depots for food and Navy warehouses for equipment, stealing jeeps, trucks, and cases of superior rations. It was this talent for logistical reallocation, stealing anything that wasn't bolted down, that truly earned them their enduring nickname among the 6th Regiment, the 40 Thieves. By the time they hit the beaches of Saipan at 8:47 a.m., They were a self-sufficient predatory organism, while other units bogged down at the seawall under mortar fire. Tachovsky's platoon accelerated, pushing 300 yards inland by 9:30 a.m., deeper than any other unit. Their orders allowed them a level of autonomy that was unheard of. They were to operate independently, making their own tactical decisions. That autonomy was tested almost immediately. At 10:15 a.m., Sergeant Bill Cannibal spotted a concealed Japanese pillbox overlooking the valley where the 2nd Marine Division was scheduled to advance. Inside was a Type 92 heavy machine gun, crewed by 7 men, perfectly positioned to massacre the incoming Marines. Standard reconnaissance doctrine would dictate marking the target and observing, but Tachovsky realized that waiting would cost American lives. In a move that defined their aggressive philosophy, Private Marvin Strombo leveled a bazooka and fired a single shot into the firing slit. The explosion silenced the gun instantly. By the time the smoke cleared, the 40 thieves had vanished 300 yards deeper into the jungle, leaving nothing behind but a smoking ruin and a clear path for the main force. They were no longer just watching the war, they were curating it. By mid-afternoon, the 40 thieves had pushed 2 miles inland, but at 3:40 p.m., the mission parameters shifted violently. In a grove north of Charan Kanoa, the platoon stumbled upon a nightmare scenario. 37 Japanese Type 97 medium tanks sitting under camouflage netting. This discovery shattered the intelligence estimates. Marine planners had told the invasion force that the Japanese possessed maybe a dozen tanks on the entire island. Tachovsky was looking at 3 times that number in a single staging area. The threat was existential. If these 37 tanks hit the beachhead after dark, they could punch through the thin infantry lines and ravage the supply dumps and command posts, potentially throwing the invasion back into the sea. Tachovsky immediately radioed the coordinates, desperate for a strike. The response from headquarters was a death sentence. Naval gunfire was tied up. Airstrikes were committed elsewhere. There were no assets available to hit the tank battalion for at least 4 hours. Tachovsky looked at the 37 tanks, then at his men, and made a calculation that would have horrified a standard infantry officer. His platoon carried 6 bazookas. Each bazooka had 6 rounds, 36 rockets total, 37 tanks. The math was almost perfect. At 4:15 p.m., he issued the order to prepare for assault. He positioned his 6 bazooka teams in a semicircle around the staging area, but at 4:25 p.m., 5 minutes before the ambush was to initiate, the dynamic changed. A mechanical roar echoed through the jungle as 37 diesel engines cranked to life simultaneously. The Japanese were launching their counterattack earlier than intelligence predicted. Tachovsky made a pivot that likely saved the beachhead. He cancelled the attack and ordered his platoon to shadow the battalion instead. As the enemy column moved out, the 40 thieves moved with them, staying 200 yards to the flank in the jungle cover. Every 10 minutes, Tachovsky radioed real-time updates on the enemy's speed and direction. Because of this violation of standard procedure, operating alone, deep in enemy territory, the Marines on the beach began to shift their defenses, distributing bazookas and readying Sherman tanks for the collision that was coming. At 7:23 p.m., the fragile silence of the twilight shattered. 37 tanks roared out of the jungle, flanked by a screaming wave of infantry. The gap between the Marine divisions began to buckle immediately. In the chaos of the breakthrough, Lieutenant Tachovsky spotted an anomaly that froze him. While the main Japanese force hammered the front line, a single Type 97 tank broke formation. It wasn't lost, it was hunting. The tank commander had found a 200-yard gap in the American lines, a ravine that offered a paved road directly to the 6th Marine Regiment's command post. The stakes were catastrophic. 400 yards away, Colonel Risley was coordinating the entire divisional defense. If that tank reached the CP, it would massacre the senior command staff. Tachovsky had 3 minutes to solve a physics problem with a rocket launcher. He grabbed Private Herbert Hodges, the platoon's deadliest bazooka operator. Tachovsky and Hodges sprinted down the slope to intercept the tank. They reached an ambush point just 30 yards from the ravine trail at 7:31 p.m. Seconds later, the tank lumbered into view. Hodges lay prone, the bazooka tube heavy on his shoulder. To kill it, he needed a side shot. He waited. The tank closed the distance. 25 yards, 20 yards, 15 yards. Then, a stroke of luck, the tank stopped. The commander paused to check his map. At 7:32 p.m., Hodges pulled the trigger. The rocket slammed into the tank's left side, just below the turret ring. The shaped charge burned through the steel and detonated inside, killing everyone instantly. That fireball did more than destroy a single tank. The Japanese infantry, advancing nearby, saw the massive explosion and assumed they had run into a major fortification. Fearing a trap, they diverted their assault away from the vulnerable command post. Hodges' single rocket hadn't just saved Colonel Risley, it had tricked an entire enemy battalion into attacking the wrong target. But the 40 thieves had no time to celebrate. The muzzle flash had revealed their position, and the jungle was about to explode around them. The platoon executed a fighting retreat, but at 1:29 p.m. the next day, the terrain betrayed them. They hit a steep ravine, 40 feet deep, ending in a box canyon. There was no exit. Tachovsky counted 40 Japanese soldiers on the ridges, firing down into the depression. By all conventional logic, this was the end. But Tachovsky noticed a patch of thriving vegetation at the base of the cliff. He sent 2 men to investigate. They found a narrow fissure behind the vines, a geological fault line twisting upward through the limestone as the Japanese soldiers swept the canyon floor. The 40 thieves were silently climbing through the bowels of the ridge. They emerged 30 minutes later on the opposite side of the hill, effectively behind the enemy force that was hunting them. They had pulled a vanishing act that seemed physically impossible. After surviving the ravine, Colonel Risley granted them exactly 1 night of rest before ordering them back into the green hell. But Tachovsky had one more impossibility to ask of his men. At 4:05 p.m. on June 17th, Tachovsky made a command decision that blurred the line between bravery and insanity. He wanted eyes on Garapan, the island's administrative capital, to see if the Japanese were digging in. He selected 4 men, Strombo, Mullins, Corporal Irazi, and Private Evans, to accompany him. They ghosted into the outskirts of the shattered city. The ruins were crawling with at least 200 Japanese soldiers. Stealth was becoming impossible. Then, at 5:08 p.m., Corporal Irazi spotted an opportunity. 5 Japanese military bicycles leaning against a wall. An audacious idea formed. Instead of hiding, they would hide in plain sight. At 5:15 p.m., the 5 Marines began pedaling through the heart of the Japanese occupation. They rode casually, mimicking the body language of tired soldiers. The bluff worked perfectly. Japanese troops ignored them. Some even shouted greetings. For 43 agonized minutes, the 40 thieves toured the enemy capital on 2 wheels, mapping supply dumps while passing within yards of Japanese officers. They exited the town at 5:58 p.m., bringing back intelligence that Garapan was a staging area, not a fortress. Intelligence bought with a bluff that no manual would ever endorse. By July 9th, the bill for the 40 thieves came due. They had lost 12 men killed and 9 wounded, but the return on that blood was astronomical. Marine commanders estimated that the intelligence gathered by Tachovsky's criminals had reduced overall division casualties by 15%, effectively saving 2,000 American lives. Frank Tachovsky returned to Wisconsin, became the mayor of Sturgeon Bay, and buried his past. He never spoke of the 40 thieves. His own son only learned the truth after finding a dusty footlocker following Frank's death in 2011. Today, the lineage of the 40 thieves is visible in the DNA of modern special operations. They proved a fundamental truth of warfare, that a small, lethal unit operating with autonomy, can achieve what an entire battalion cannot. The Marine Corps had labeled them troublemakers. History has finally corrected the record. They were the vanguard.